The reflection in Lucielle's bathroom mirror revealed more than just the image of Victoria Armstrong. As she adjusted her pearl necklace, a gift for her 10th wedding anniversary, her green eyes studied every detail of her face, looking for signs of the naive woman she had once been. 15 years of marriage to Preston Hamilton had transformed this idealistic young woman from Kansas City into a seasoned New York executive, but nothing prepared her for the discovery that would change her life forever. Victoria took a deep breath, her fingers sliding over the leather Hermes folder that contained not just divorce papers, but proof of betrayal that went far beyond the extramarital affair. As CFO of Hamilton Enterprises, she had access to every number, every transaction, every financial decision. Preston had never imagined that his own wife would discover the million-dollar embezzlement he had been carrying out for months with the help of Mackenzie Carter, his assistant and lover. Lucielle, located on the 45th floor of a Manhattan skyscraper, was more than just an exclusive restaurant. It was a symbol of power. The glass walls offered a panoramic view of the city that never sleeps, and each table was strategically positioned to guarantee privacy for diners who often closed multi-million-dollar deals over glasses of champagne and dishes of French haute cuisine. Leaving the bathroom, Victoria crossed the main hall with the elegance that years of socializing with New York high society had taught her. Her black Valentino dress, chosen especially for the occasion, attracted discreet glances from other customers. She knew them well, CEOs, politicians, celebrities, all part of the same exclusive circle she and Preston ran in. In the distance, Victoria could already see Preston and Mackenzie at the table next to the window. Her husband, at 45, still maintained the appearance that had made him famous on the covers of Forbes and Fortune: premature grey hair that gave him a distinguished air, an athletic build maintained by daily tennis sessions at the club, and that smile that could close deals as well as break hearts. Mackenzie, in turn, was the cliché that Victoria had refused to see for so long. 28 years old, perfectly styled blonde hair, an MBA from Stanford, and enough ambition to sleep with her married boss. What the young assistant didn't know was that her own greed would be her undoing. Approaching the table, Victoria watched the exact moment Preston spotted her. The momentary panic in his blue eyes was quickly replaced by that mask of control she knew so well. It was the same expression he used when he was about to make a hostile move in the financial market. "Victoria, darling, what a pleasant surprise," Preston said, his voice smooth as poisoned velvet. "I didn't know you were coming to Lucielle tonight." "Of course," Victoria replied, allowing herself a serene smile as she pulled up a chair. "Mackenzie, what a coincidence to find you here. I thought you would be busy finishing the quarterly reports I requested." The young assistant paled slightly, her hands moving nervously over the white linen tablecloth. We were just discussing the acquisition of West Coast Tech." It was at that moment that Preston made his desperate move. Pulling Mackenzie into a kiss, he kept his eyes fixed on Victoria, expecting to see her world fall apart. It was a gesture calculated to humiliate her, to force her into a dramatic exit that he could later use as proof of emotional instability. What Preston didn't expect was the genuine smile that formed on his wife's lips. With the calm of a chess player who had just cornered the opposing king, Victoria opened her briefcase and began to arrange documents on the table. "You know, Preston, while you were busy building this little theatre, I was building something too," she said, her clear, steady voice attracting the attention of the nearby tables. "Financial reports, bank statements, compromising emails. It's surprising how much you can discover when you know where to look." Preston's face lost all colour as he recognized the documents. Beside him, Mackenzie looked like she was about to pass out, her wide eyes fixed on the papers detailing every penny diverted to offshore accounts. "You wouldn't do that," Preston whispered, his mask of control beginning to crack. "It would destroy everything we've built." "No, Preston," Victoria replied, standing up gracefully. "You've already done that. I'm just making sure everyone gets exactly what they deserve." As she walked away from the table, Victoria could feel the weight of the last 6 months lifting from her shoulders. Outside, The lights of Manhattan twinkled like stars against the night sky, promising a new beginning. She had entered Le Ciel as Preston Hamilton's betrayed wife, but she would leave as the woman who toppled an empire built on lies. The power game was over, and Victoria Armstrong had finally learned to play by her own rules. Victoria left Le Ciel with firm steps, ignoring the messages that were already starting to bombard her cell phone. The building's lobby, with its Italian marble and crystal chandeliers, witnessed her triumphant exit while James, her trusted driver for a decade, was already waiting for her with the door of the Bentley open. "Home, Mrs. Hamilton?" James asked, his professional tone masking the concern he had for the boss he had seen go through so many changes over the years. "No, James." "To Margaret's office on Park Avenue, please." Margaret Reynolds, senior partner at the law firm Reynolds & Associates, was more than just Victoria's divorce lawyer. She was her confidant for the past 3 months, since the first evidence of Preston's deviance began to emerge. The clock said 9:45 p.m. when Victoria entered the office decorated with works of contemporary art and a privileged view of Central Park. "So, you've finally laid your cards on the table," Margaret commented, pouring 2 glasses of a Bordeaux she reserved for special occasions. At 55, with elegantly cropped grey hair and discerning eyes behind designer glasses, she was known for turning high-profile divorces into true works of legal art. "Preston reacted exactly as we predicted," Victoria replied, accepting the cup. "The kiss with Mackenzie was an unexpected bonus. Now we have witnesses to the adultery in one of Manhattan's most exclusive restaurants." Margaret smiled, the kind of smile that had made financial tycoons tremble in deposition. "The documents you've collected are impeccable. The diversions to the Cayman Islands, the phantom transactions through the Delaware subsidiary, even that interesting consulting pattern that coincidentally began when Mackenzie was hired." Victoria watched the city lights through the window, remembering the exact moment her suspicion turned to certainty. It had been during the Hamilton Foundation charity ball 3 months ago. Preston was dancing with Mackenzie, keeping a distance appropriate for boss and subordinate, but his eyes— Victoria knew that look. It was the same one he used to address to her in the early years of their marriage. "It's not Preston I'm worried about," Victoria admitted, turning the bowl between her fingers. "It's the council. Tomorrow, when the news starts circulating—" "The council will do exactly as you planned," Margaret interrupted, her confidence unshakable. "Preston has always been the face of the company, but you are the financial brains. They know that. And with the evidence we have of the embezzlement, they have no choice but to remove you from the presidency." Victoria's phone vibrated. It was a message from Charlotte, her younger sister who lived in Boston. "How it was all he said." Victoria smiled, remembering the long conversations with Charlotte during the nights when the truth about her marriage began to reveal itself. "I need to get ready for tomorrow," Victoria said, standing up. "The council meets at 9 a.m., and Preston will certainly try to get ahead of it." "Let him try," Margaret replied, her tone confident. "We have something he doesn't, the truth documented on letterhead and signed on all the right pages." Back at the Bentley, Victoria instructed James to take her to her Upper East Side apartment, not the penthouse she shared with Preston, but the space she had secretly acquired 2 months ago in anticipation of tonight. The place was smaller but still elegant, decorated with pieces that reflected his true taste, not the ostentation that Preston had always demanded. As she prepared for bed, Victoria received one last text, this time from Preston. "You have no idea what you just started." She didn't respond. Instead, he opened his laptop and began reviewing documents for the council meeting. The next 12 hours would be crucial, and she knew Preston would use every minute to try to maintain his control over Hamilton Enterprises. What he didn't know was that Victoria had learned more than just corporate finance during her years as CFO. She had learned the art of strategic patience, the importance of building silent alliances, and most importantly, she had learned that sometimes you have to destroy everything to build something better. His phone rang again. It was Richard Montgomery, chairman of the board. "Victoria, I just received a very interesting call from Preston. I think we need to talk before the meeting tomorrow." "Sure, Richard. How about coffee at 7:30 at the Four Seasons?" Victoria replied, her calm voice masking the whirlwind of thoughts forming in her mind. After finishing the call, Victoria allowed herself a moment of reflection. 15 years ago, she was just an up-and-coming financial analyst from Kansas City who had captured the attention of the charming rising CEO. Now, she was about to prove that she had become much more than the trophy wife Preston thought he had achieved. The sun was beginning to rise over Manhattan when Victoria finally allowed herself to sleep, knowing that the next few hours would change not only her future, but the fate of all those who had underestimated the woman behind the Hamilton empire. The Four Seasons at 7:30 in the morning was perfect neutral territory for the conversation Victoria needed to have with Richard Montgomery. The hotel's restaurant, with its understated elegance and select clientele of breakfast tycoons and politicians, provided the ideal setting for a discussion that could reshape the future of Hamilton Enterprises. Victoria arrived 15 minutes early, strategically choosing a table far away that allowed a full view of the room. As he waited, he mentally reviewed every document in his folder, every number that could be questioned, every piece of evidence that supported his accusations against Preston. Richard Montgomery entered punctually, his Brioni suit impeccable and the serious expression that Victoria knew well from the council's most tense meetings. At 63, Richard was a legend on Wall Street, known as much for his business acumen as his unyielding moral code. "Victoria," he greeted, sitting down, "Preston called me at 3 in the morning, said some pretty disturbing things about you trying a corporate hit." A waiter approached silently, pouring coffee for both of them. Victoria allowed herself a moment to add a drop of milk to her cup, a gesture she had learned to use to demonstrate calm in pressure situations. "Interesting that he mentions scams, Richard," she replied, opening her folder, "because what I have here shows exactly who is trying to manipulate the company." Over the next hour, Victoria methodically presented every piece of evidence she had collected. The deviations started small, overpriced consultancies, non-existent expenses, but have grown in complexity and value over the last 6 months. The pattern was clear. Each suspicious transaction coincided with dates when Preston and Mackenzie were traveling for work. "Damn," Richard muttered, running a hand through his greying hair as he examined a particularly damaging report. "How have we not seen this before?" "Because Preston is brilliant at what he does," Victoria admitted. "He built layers of legitimacy over every transaction. If I hadn't had direct access as CFO, and if I hadn't been specifically looking for wrongdoing—" "Why did you start looking?" Richard interrupted, his piercing blue eyes fixed on her. Victoria hesitated, realizing that the time had come to reveal something she had kept to herself. "Do you remember the merger with West Coast Tech, the one that seemed too perfect?" Richard nodded. The acquisition had been celebrated as one of Hamilton Enterprises' greatest successes the previous year. "I discovered that Preston had leaked inside information before the official announcement. He and a few select investors made millions from the stock move." Victoria slid another document onto the table. Mackenzie was among those investors. The council president removed his glasses, rubbing his tired eyes. The Four Seasons was beginning to empty, executives leaving for their offices in nearby skyscrapers. "The council meets in—" he consulted his Rolex. "Just under an hour. Preston will certainly have his own version of events." "And your own allies," Victoria added. "But unlike him, Richard, I'm not asking you to just take my word for it. Every document here can be independently verified." "What exactly do you want, Victoria?" It was the question she was waiting for. "I want Hamilton Enterprises to remain the company I helped build, a company built on integrity, not fraud and manipulation." "Even if it means destroying your marriage publicly?" Victoria smiled, but it was a sad smile. "My marriage ended the moment I discovered that Preston was willing to sacrifice everything, our company, our reputation, our life together, for power and greed." Standing up, Richard adjusted his tie in an automatic gesture. "I will be presiding over the council meeting at 9. I suggest you both be prepared for an interesting morning." As she watched him leave, Victoria received a text from Margaret. "I just got a call from Preston's lawyer. They want to negotiate." "Too late," Victoria replied. getting up and leaving a generous tip on the table. Outside, Manhattan vibrated with the energy of another day beginning. Executives rushed to meetings, tourists took photos of the imposing architecture, and somewhere on the 47th floor of a glass and steel skyscraper, Preston Hamilton was probably trying desperately to save the empire he was about to lose. On the way to the Hamilton Enterprises headquarters, Victoria received 3 more messages from Preston, each one more threatening than the last. The last one said, "Don't force me to use what I know about your family." That particular threat made Victoria clench her fists. Preston was referring to the secret she kept about her father, a matter she had only confided in her husband in 15 years of marriage. It was her last desperate move, and it only proved that Victoria was right in her decision. The Bentley stopped in front of the Hamilton Enterprises building at exactly 8:45 a.m. Victoria got out of the car feeling the weight of the stares of the employees who were entering for another day of work. In a few hours, their professional lives could change drastically, and she took this responsibility with the seriousness that the situation demanded. In the executive elevator, Victoria found herself alone with her thoughts. 15 floors to decide the future of hundreds of employees, your own career, and the legacy of one of Manhattan's largest companies. The doors opened on the boardroom floor, and she walked forward with the determination of someone who knew that some battles needed to be fought, no matter the personal cost. The Hamilton Enterprises boardroom, with its oval mahogany table and panoramic view of Manhattan, had witnessed countless corporate battles over the years. But that morning, as the 12 council members took their usual seats, the tension in the air was palpable in a different way. Victoria sat in her assigned seat, aware of the gazes divided between her and Preston, who occupied the opposite end of the table. Mackenzie was not present, a small detail that did not go unnoticed by anyone. The advisors, all veterans of the corporate world, maintained carefully neutral expressions, like professional poker players, waiting for the right moment to reveal their cards. Richard Montgomery began the meeting at precisely 9 a.m., his deep voice filling the room with the authority that years of leadership gave him. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here to discuss serious allegations involving the management of Hamilton Enterprises." Before he could continue, Preston stood up, adjusting the knot on his Hermes tie. "If I may, Richard, I would like to speak first." His tone was controlled, but Victoria noticed the slight tremor in his hands, a tell she had learned to identify through years of joint negotiations. "Victoria Armstrong, my wife and our CFO, is trying to orchestrate a hostile takeover of the company," Preston declared, his eyes scanning the room. "She fabricated documents and manipulated financial data to discredit me, all motivated by personal jealousy and an imagined marital betrayal." Victoria maintained her calm expression, even as some of the councillors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. She watched as Preston handed out a series of blue folders, presumably containing his own version of events. "What you have in your hands," Preston continued, "is evidence that Victoria has been systematically altering financial reports for the past 3 months. Her obsession with destroying me has caused her to compromise the integrity of this company." It was then that Victoria noticed something interesting. Gerald Wilson, Preston's oldest advisor and normally ally, was frowning as he examined the documents. She knew that Gerald, with his PhD in forensic accounting, would be the first to notice the inconsistencies in Preston's accusations. "Mr. Hamilton," Gerald interrupted, cleaning his glasses meticulously, "these reports you present as manipulated by Mrs. Armstrong. They were signed by you in the first instance, correct?" Preston hesitated for a split second, long enough for Victoria to realize her plan was working. "Yes, but—" "And for the past 6 months," Victoria finally spoke up, her calm voice cutting through the air like silk over steel. "Every questionable transaction has been personally approved by the CEO, with an interesting temporal correlation to certain corporate travel." She opened her own folder, distributing carefully organized documents. "What you have now are bank records, emails, and transfer receipts that show a systematic pattern of financial embezzlement. Each document has been verified by independent auditors." The room fell into a tense silence as counsellors examined the evidence. Victoria watched the expressions change from skepticism to concern, and finally, to something close to outrage. "This is ridiculous," Preston exploded, his control finally slipping away. "Are you going to take her word against mine? I built this company." "We built this company," Victoria corrected softly, "and I'm not asking you to believe words, Preston. The numbers speak for themselves." Richard Montgomery cleared his throat, attracting everyone's attention. "Mr. Hamilton, do you have anything to say about this specific evidence?" Preston pulled out his phone, typing furiously. "I'm calling in my legal team. This is clearly an attempt to—" "Your legal team is already aware of the situation," Victoria interrupted. "Actually, they must be pretty busy right now, considering the FBI just received an anonymous tip about insider trading related to the merger with West Coast Tech." Preston's face paled visibly. Across the table, Barbara Chen, the youngest counsellor, raised her hand. "I propose an immediate vote to temporarily remove Mr. Hamilton from the presidency until a full investigation is conducted." The next 20 minutes were filled with technical and procedural discussions, but Victoria barely registered them. His attention was focused on Preston, who looked like he had aged a decade in a single morning. When the final vote was tallied, 10 votes in favour of removal, 2 abstentions, she did not feel the satisfaction she had expected, only a deep tiredness. "Victoria," Preston called as she prepared to leave the room. His tone had changed, becoming almost pleading. "You don't understand what you just did. There are things you don't know, agreements that need to be kept." "I know enough," she replied, adjusting the strap of her Chanel bag. "And whatever deal you made in the shadows, Preston, you'll now have to deal with in the light of day." Leaving the council room, Victoria found the executive corridor unusually silent. The news was certainly already spreading across the building's 47 floors. Her phone vibrated. It was a message from Margaret. "I just found out. Are you ready for the next phase?" Victoria smiled, entering the private elevator. The next phase would be even more challenging, rebuilding Hamilton Enterprises and his own life, both free from Preston Hamilton's shadow. The elevator began its descent, and with each floor that passed, Victoria felt the weight of the last few months dissipating, replaced by the determination of someone who had finally regained control of their own story. Victoria watched the city from the private terrace of her new Upper East Side apartment, the untouched glass of red wine in her hands. The last 48 hours had been a whirlwind of events that had completely transformed the power dynamics at Hamilton Enterprises. Preston's departure as CEO dominated financial headlines, and his phone kept getting calls from journalists eager for an exclusive statement. "The divorce papers have been officially filed," Margaret reported, sitting comfortably in one of the Italian leather armchairs that decorated the space. "And, as we predicted, Preston is contesting the division of assets." "Of course you are," Victoria replied, finally taking a sip of the Bordeaux. "He never accepted that I could have resources of my own. The apartment in my name, the shares I bought independently. Preston always assumed I would depend on him financially." The sound of heels on the marble floor announced the arrival of Charlotte, who had flown in from Boston as soon as she heard of the events. Her younger sister carried bags of food from Dean and DeLuca, determined to make sure Victoria was fed properly during the crisis. "Has the board decided who will be the interim CEO?" Charlotte asked, starting to organize the gourmet containers on the kitchen island. "Richard Montgomery suggested my name," Victoria revealed, causing a momentary pause in her sister's actions. "But I refused. I need to focus on stabilizing the company as CFO and cleaning up the mess Preston left." Margaret raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by the information. "Strategically, accepting the position would give you more power to implement the necessary changes." "And it would make me the perfect target," Victoria countered. "Preston still has powerful allies in the market. If I took over as president now, it would be easy for them to paint this all as a calculated coup by an ambitious wife." Victoria's phone vibrated again. It was a message from Gerald Wilson. "Emergency meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. We discovered more irregularities in the European subsidiaries." Things are going to get worse before they get better. Victoria sighed, showing the message to Margaret. Preston has always been meticulous about hiding his tracks, but now that we know where to look... Charlotte approached with a plate of grilled salmon and quinoa, practically forcing her sister to eat. You need to maintain your strength. Preston may be sidelined, but he still has a lot of tricks up his sleeve. As if to confirm Charlotte's words, the private elevator announced an arrival. The three women turned to see Mackenzie Carter emerging from the chrome doors, her usual air of confidence replaced by an expression of barely concealed anxiety. "Victoria," Mackenzie began, her voice shaking slightly, "we need to talk." Margaret immediately positioned herself next to Victoria, her protective lawyer instinct activated. Any communication must be made through appropriate legal channels. "I'm not here as Preston's lover," Mackenzie declared, surprising everyone with her directness. "I'm here because there are things you need to know, things that could affect not just the company, but innocent lives." Victoria studied the young woman for a moment, noticing the dark circles under her eyes barely concealed by expensive makeup, and the slight tremor in her hands that were holding a folder of documents. "Charlotte, Margaret, could you give us a moment?" Reluctantly, the two women retreated to the adjacent office, leaving Victoria and Mackenzie alone in the main space of the apartment. "Why now?" Victoria asked, indicating one of the armchairs for Mackenzie to sit on. "Because Preston lost his mind," Mackenzie replied, her professional facade crumbling. "After the council meeting, he started making calls, threatening people. There's a much bigger scheme at play, Victoria. The embezzlements you uncovered are just the tip of the iceberg." Victoria poured Mackenzie a glass of water, noting how the young girl looked genuinely scared. "Continue." West Coast Tech wasn't the only manipulated acquisition. Preston has an entire network of shell companies, some of them linked to dangerous people. Mackenzie opened her briefcase, revealing documents that made Victoria's blood run cold. He used Hamilton Enterprises' reputation as a front for operations that went far beyond simple corporate fraud. The next 2 hours were filled with revelations that challenged everything Victoria thought she knew about her husband and the company he helped build. When Mackenzie finally left, leaving behind a stack of documents that would need to be carefully checked, Victoria felt the weight of her responsibility increase exponentially. Margaret and Charlotte returned to the main room, finding Victoria deep in thought facing the night view of Manhattan. "Good?" Margaret questioned, her professional tone masking concern. "Call Richard Montgomery," Victoria instructed, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her mind. "Tell him I accept the position of interim CEO. Things are about to get a lot more complicated than we imagined." The sound of the city below seemed distant now, as Victoria contemplated her next move. Preston had turned Hamilton Enterprises into a chessboard far more dangerous than anyone could have suspected, and now it was up to her to not only save the company, but protect all those who might be hit by the coming storm. "Are you sure about this?" Charlotte asked softly, knowing well the weight her sister was about to carry. "No," Victoria admitted, "but sometimes the most important decisions are the ones that scare us the most." His gaze turned to the city lights, each representing lives that could be affected by his next actions. The night would be long, but Victoria Armstrong was ready to face any challenge that came her way. The board meeting to formalize Victoria as interim CEO of Hamilton Enterprises began promptly at 8 a.m. The rising Manhattan sun painted long shadows across the boardroom windows as Richard Montgomery conducted the proceedings with the formality the occasion demanded. As CFO and now interim CEO, Ms. Armstrong will have full authority to implement the necessary changes during this transition period, Richard declared, his deep voice echoing in the quiet room. "Any objections?" The silence that followed was more revealing than any words. Victoria observed the faces around the table, identifying allies and possible opponents. Gerald Wilson nodded discreetly in her direction, a silent support that she knew would be valuable in the days to come. After the meeting, Victoria headed to the office that previously belonged to Preston. The secretary, Amanda Porter, a middle-aged woman who had served the company for 2 decades, had already removed Preston's personal belongings, leaving only the essential items. "The European subsidiary reports you requested, Ms. Armstrong," Amanda said, handing over a red folder. "And there's something else you need to see." Victoria accepted a second envelope, this one unmarked. Inside he found photographs of Preston in Zurich, dated 3 months ago. He wasn't alone. At his side was Stefan Kovac, a name that made Victoria momentarily freeze. "Where did you get that, Amanda?" "I have a nephew who works for the Financial Times in London," she replied, closing the office door. "He was investigating some suspicious transactions when these photos reached him." Victoria knew Kovac's reputation, a Croatian businessman with questionable connections in Eastern Europe. Hamilton Enterprises had never done official business with his companies, mainly due to the suspicions of money laundering surrounding him. His phone vibrated. It was a message from Mackenzie. "Kovac is in NY. Preston has arranged to meet him tonight." "Amanda, I need you to cancel my appointments this afternoon," Victoria instructed, already typing a message to Margaret. "And contact our security team. I want a full report on all of Preston's entries and exits from the building over the past 6 months." The next few hours were a whirlwind of emergency meetings and disturbing discoveries. The internal audit team discovered a series of suspicious transactions linking Hamilton Enterprises subsidiaries to shell companies in Eastern European countries. Each discovery only confirmed Victoria's fears. Preston had turned parts of the company into an elaborate money laundering scheme. "We need to proceed with extreme caution," Margaret warned during a secure video conference. "If Kovac really is involved, we are dealing with people who will not hesitate to use unorthodox methods to protect their interests." Victoria watched the city from the window of her new office, feeling the weight of responsibility on her shoulders. "How long until we get the court order?" "Judge Thompson must sign by the end of the day," Margaret replied. "But Preston is probably already destroying evidence." A soft knock on the door interrupted the conversation. It was Charlotte, carrying a folder and a worried expression. "Vic, you need to see this." The documents Charlotte brought back revealed something even more disturbing, a series of bank transfers from Preston's personal account to an offshore one in the Cayman Islands, all coinciding with the dates of accidents that had affected Hamilton Enterprises' direct competitors in recent years. "My God," Victoria murmured, connecting the dots. "He wasn't just laundering money. Preston was using the proceeds to—" "Industrial sabotage," Charlotte added, "and from what Mackenzie told me, Kovac was the go-between." The sound of sirens on the street below caught Victoria's attention. 3 FBI cars parked in front of the Hamilton Enterprises building. His phone rang immediately. It was Richard Montgomery. "Victoria, they have a search warrant," he informed, his voice tense, and Preston was just detained trying to board a private flight to Zurich. The next few moments were a blur of activity. FBI agents fanned out across the executive floors, collecting documents and electronic equipment. Victoria cooperated fully, providing access to all the records her team had discovered. "Ms. Armstrong," an agent approached, introducing herself as Rachel Martinez. "We need your cooperation to understand the extent of these operations." "You will have all the support you need," Victoria assured, maintaining her composure even as she saw employees being escorted for questioning. "But I need to make sure our innocent employees are protected." The following hours were dedicated to managing the crisis on multiple fronts. Victoria coordinated press releases, emergency investor meetings, and, most importantly, an all-staff meeting to ensure transparency and stability. At the end of the day, exhausted but determined, Victoria returned to her apartment on the Upper East Side. Charlotte was waiting for her with a prepared dinner and a bottle of wine. "How are you really dealing with all of this?" his sister asked, pouring 2 generous glasses of Cabernet. Victoria allowed herself a moment of vulnerability. 15 years, Charlie. 15 years of building something you believed was legitimate, only to discover you were living a lie." "It wasn't all a lie," Charlotte argued softly. "The good that Hamilton Enterprises has done, the jobs it has created, the lives it has changed, that's real, and now you have a chance to make sure it stays that way." Victoria's phone vibrated once again. It was a message from Preston, sent from some unregistered phone. You have no idea what you've just started. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed. Victoria deleted the message without responding. Tomorrow would be another day of battles, but tonight she would allow herself a moment of peace, however brief, in the company of her sister, and with the knowledge that, no matter what Preston had planned, she was prepared to face it. The morning at the Hamilton Enterprises office began with an uncharacteristic silence. The usual buzz of employees was replaced by whispered conversations and apprehensive looks. News of Preston's arrest and the FBI investigation had spread quickly, and Victoria could feel the uncertainty in the air as she walked through the main lobby. Amanda was waiting for her with a stack of urgent messages and a worried look. The Department of Justice called 3 times this morning, and there are reporters camped out at the entrance to the building. Arrange a press conference for 2 p.m., Victoria instructed, entering her office, and please ask Richard to convene the executive committee in 30 minutes. She barely had time to settle in when Mackenzie walked in, looking even more nervous than the day before. Victoria, I just got a call from Preston's lawyer. They want to make a deal. What kind of deal? The kind that involves names and dates and places that could implicate very powerful people, Mackenzie replied, closing the door. Preston is offering information on Kovac in exchange for leniency. Victoria studied the young woman for a moment. The last 48 hours had clearly taken their toll. The red eyes and shaking hands told a story of sleepless nights and constant anxiety. Sit down, Mackenzie. Victoria indicated the leather couch. Tell me exactly when you realized you were involved in something bigger than a simple extramarital affair. Mackenzie hesitated, her fingers playing nervously with the hem of her Prada skirt. It was during the trip to Zurich. Preston asked me to deliver an envelope to a man in a cafe. He seemed innocent at the time, but then I saw the same man on the news. He was a known associate of Kovac, wanted for international fraud. The phone on Victoria's desk rang. It was Rachel Martinez from the FBI. Ms. Armstrong, we need you at Bureau headquarters immediately. We found something on the company's servers that requires your attention. Victoria scheduled a meeting for 2 hours later, giving her enough time to meet with the executive committee. Turning his attention to Mackenzie, he noticed that the young woman was on the verge of tears. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Mackenzie whispered. I wanted to be part of something important. Preston made me feel special, needed. He told me I had the potential to be so much more than just an assistant. And now you're a key witness in a federal investigation, Victoria added softly. Mackenzie, you need to decide what kind of person you want to be from now on. The meeting with the executive committee was tense, but productive. Victoria presented an action plan for the coming days, including full audits of all subsidiaries and a thorough review of each international contract. Our priority is to maintain investor confidence and protect our employees' jobs, she declared, her firm voice echoing in the conference room. We will face this crisis with transparency and integrity. At FBI headquarters, Victoria met not only Rachel Martinez, but also 2 Treasury agents and a representative from the Department of Justice. The discoveries on the company's servers were even more serious than she imagined. We found evidence of a sophisticated currency evasion scheme, Martinez explained, spreading documents out on the table. Mr. Hamilton wasn't just laundering money for Kovac. He was using Hamilton Enterprises' infrastructure to facilitate illegal transactions on a global scale. Victoria looked over the documents, her stomach dropping as she recognized her own signature on some of the reports. As CFO, she had inadvertently approved transactions that were now revealed to be part of an international criminal network. I need you to help us understand these transactions, one of the Treasury agents requested. His experience as CFO is crucial as we map out the full extent of the scheme. The next 3 hours were dedicated to unraveling complex financial transactions, each discovery revealing a new layer of deception and criminality. When he finally left the FBI building, the sun was already setting over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed ironically serene. Back at her apartment, Victoria found Charlotte waiting with a grave expression. I just spoke to Margaret. Preston is offering a reduced sentence deal. He's going to try to drag me along, Victoria concluded, pouring herself a generous shot of whiskey. "Preston knows my signature is on compromising documents." "But you can prove you didn't know," Charlotte argued. "The evidence clearly shows that he manipulated reports and withheld information." Victoria walked to the window, watching the lights of the city that never sleeps. 15 years of marriage, of trust, of hard work, all reduced to piles of criminal evidence and plea bargains. His phone buzzed with a message from Richard Montgomery. "Extraordinary board meeting tomorrow, 7 a.m. We need to discuss the future of the company." "What are you going to do?" Charlotte asked softly. "Which I should have done a long time ago," Victoria replied, already typing a message to Margaret. "I will fight not just for the company, but for everyone Preston betrayed with his actions. And this time, I won't let him set the rules of the game." The clock was almost midnight when Victoria finally allowed herself to lie down, although sleep seemed a distant luxury. Tomorrow would be another day of battles, but for the first time since this whole crisis began, she felt like she was finally in control of her destiny. The morning began with the insistent sound of Victoria's cell phone. It was a text message from an unknown number. "Safe 721, Bank of Manhattan, Broadway branch. The password is our first meeting." The message was from Preston, she was sure, and her stomach clenched at the thought of what could be waiting for her in that safe. Victoria arrived at the bank at precisely 7:15 a.m., wearing a grey Channel ensemble that served as armour for the challenges the day promised. The bank manager, recognizing her immediately, personally led her to the private vaults area. 721, she muttered to herself, her fingers gliding over the number pad. Ear 614208, the date he met Preston at a charity event in Chicago. The safe opened with a soft click, revealing a single red folder with the discreet logo of Hamilton Enterprises. Inside, Victoria found documents that made her blood run cold. These weren't just records of illegal transactions. They were evidence that his own father, William Armstrong, had been involved in questionable dealings with Preston long before Victoria arrived on the scene. The date on the oldest documents went back to 2007, a year before she met Preston. "Your father never told you how he actually managed to save the family farm, did he?" Preston's voice echoed in his memory of a conversation years ago that now took on an entirely new meaning. His phone vibrated. It was Margaret. "The council is meeting. Where are you?" "I need 15 more minutes," Victoria replied, quickly photographing each document in the safe. "And Margaret, prepare for some additional complications." On the way to Hamilton Enterprises, Victoria called Charlotte. "I need you to find all of Dad's financial records from 2007 to 2008, especially related to the farm." "Vic, what's going on?" "Preston wasn't just threatening me when he mentioned family secrets," Victoria explained, watching the traffic through the Bentley's window. "He has proof that Dad was involved in his operations from the beginning." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. William Armstrong had passed away 3 years ago, taking with him, apparently, more secrets than his daughters imagined. When Victoria entered the council room, every face turned in her direction. Richard Montgomery looked as if he had aged a decade since the day before. "The news is not good," he began without preamble. "The Department of Justice is expanding the investigation. They found connections to other companies, other people, including William Armstrong," Victoria added, her voice steady despite the storm within. She opened her tablet, projecting photos of the documents from the safe onto the room's screen. For 2 hours, the council examined the evidence, discussed implications, and debated strategies. Victoria observed every reaction, every whisper, every exchange of glances, mentally building a map of allies and possible threats. "This changes our position," Barbara Chen argued. "If your father was involved from the beginning, how can we be sure that you—" "Because unlike Preston, I have proof of my innocence," Victoria interrupted, sliding another set of documents across the table. "Complete records of all my actions as CFO, verified by independent auditors, and most importantly, evidence that I attempted to stop several of the suspicious transactions over the past few months, only to be deliberately misled by Preston." Gerald Wilson cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses. "What do you suggest we do, Victoria?" "Full transparency with investigators, unrestricted cooperation with the FBI, and a restructuring plan that protects our employees and shareholders as we cleanse the company of any trace of these illegal operations." After the meeting, Victoria found Mackenzie waiting in her office. The young woman seemed to have regained something of her usual composure. "I have decided to cooperate fully with the FBI," Mackenzie announced. "I'm going to tell you everything I know about Preston and Kovach's operations." Victoria nodded, studying the woman who had been her husband's lover. "You know this could be dangerous, don't you? Kovach isn't known for his leniency toward whistleblowers." "I know, but I also know that it's the only way to right at least some of the harm I helped cause." The rest of the day was filled with meetings with lawyers, investigators, and executives. Victoria coordinated the implementation of new compliance protocols, authorized extensive audits, and worked with the communications team to maintain transparency with employees and investors. It was already evening when he finally returned to his apartment. Charlotte was waiting for her with a serious expression and an old folder on the coffee table. "I found the farm records," his sister announced. "And Vic, there's more, much more." Victoria poured 2 glasses of wine, bracing herself for yet another layer of painful truths about her past. As the sisters were looking through the documents, the phone rang. It was Rachel Martinez from the FBI. "Mrs. Armstrong, Preston has agreed to collaborate, but he has one condition. He only wants to talk to you." Victoria closed her eyes, feeling the weight of 15 years of lies and manipulations on her shoulders. Tomorrow she would face Preston again, this time through the bars of a federal cell. But tonight, she would allow herself the luxury of crying for the father she thought she knew and the man who had turned her life into an elaborate web of disappointments. Charlotte held his hand silently, offering the kind of comfort only a sister could provide. Outside, Manhattan continued its frenetic pace, indifferent to the dramas unfolding in its glass and steel skyscrapers. The interrogation room at the Federal Detention Center in Manhattan was exactly as Victoria imagined. Grey walls, a metal table bolted to the floor, and a one-way mirror that reflected her own tense expression. Preston, wearing an orange jumpsuit that contrasted dramatically with his usual elegance, looked smaller somehow, as if the prison walls were already beginning to compress him. "You've always been smarter than I gave you credit for," Preston began, a tired smile playing on his lips. "Did you find the documents in the safe?" "Why, Preston? Why involve my father in your schemes?" "William came to me," Preston replied, leaning forward. "His precious family farm was sinking into debt. He needed money. I needed Midwestern connections. It was a mutually beneficial arrangement." Victoria felt her stomach drop. "And then you met me at the charity event in Chicago." "It wasn't a coincidence," Preston admitted. "William mentioned that his eldest daughter was a brilliant financial analyst. I needed someone with her talent, someone who could legitimize certain operations." "You planned everything from the beginning," Victoria concluded, her voice shaking slightly. "Our meeting, the wedding, my position in the company. At first, yes. But Victoria—" Preston hesitated, something close to sincerity in his eyes. "I really fell in love with you. You were unlike anyone I've ever met." "Different enough to use me as a shield for 15 years, Victoria snapped, her professional composure beginning to crack. "To make me sign documents that could incriminate me?" "I was protecting you," Preston argued, "keeping you involved enough to be credible, but distant enough to maintain your innocence." Victoria opened her briefcase, scattering documents on the metal table. "And Kovach? When did he enter the equation?" "Stefan Kovach is more dangerous than you know." Preston lowered his voice, looking nervously in the mirror. "He has connections with people who make problems disappear, and the people who cause them. Is that why you want to make a deal? Are you scared of Kovach?" Preston let out a bitter laugh. "I'm trying to keep you alive, Victoria. Why do you think I kept those documents about your father in the safe? It's our insurance policy." Victoria studied the man in front of her, the man who had been her husband, her partner, her mentor. 15 years of memories flashed through his mind. Romantic dinners, business trips, nights working side by side in his home office. How much of it had been real? I need names, Preston. All of them. Every person involved, every suspicious transaction, every offshore account. And in return, you keep your federal protection, and I make sure the truth about my father stays buried. Preston considered the offer for a long moment. There's a flash drive, he finally said, hidden in the false bottom of the top right drawer of my desk at home. Password, Victoria, Kansas, 2008. It has everything you need to know. Victoria stood up, gathering her documents. One last thing, she said, pausing at the door. Mackenzie, did she know about all this? No, Preston replied, looking genuinely sorry for the first time. She was just a distraction, a mistake I made when the weight of all these lies became unbearable. Leaving the interrogation room, Victoria found Rachel Martinez waiting. Did we get what we needed? The agent asked. More than that, Victoria replied. We have a new lead to follow. Back at Hamilton Enterprises, Victoria found Charlotte in her office, surrounded by stacks of old documents. I found something, his sister announced, holding up a yellowed photo. Dad with Preston in 2007 at a farm party. They knew each other a lot earlier than we thought. Victoria examined the photograph, noticing the two men's knowing smiles. We need to protect his legacy, Charlie, not because of what he did, but because of our mother's memory of him. What about the truth? Sometimes the truth does more harm than good, Victoria replied, putting the photo away in her briefcase. Our priority now is to clean up Hamilton Enterprises and make sure Kovac can't hurt anyone else. The remainder of the day was dedicated to implementing new safety protocols and preparing press releases. When Victoria finally got home, she found an envelope with no return address under her door. Inside was just one photo, her and Preston on their wedding day, radiant and in love, completely oblivious to the future that awaited them. On the back, written in Preston's elegant handwriting, a single sentence. It wasn't all a lie. Victoria kept the photo in her drawer, along with 15 years of other memories that she now needed to re-evaluate. Tomorrow she would face another battle in the war to save her company and her reputation. But tonight, she allowed herself to remember the woman she had been, young, passionate and full of dreams, and to cry one last time for the future that could have been. The flash drive Preston mentioned turned out to be a digital Pandora's box. Victoria spent the entire morning in her home office, immersed in files that documented a decade and a half of carefully orchestrated illicit operations. Each folder opened revealed a new layer of deception, an intricate web of lies that extended far beyond the confines of Hamilton Enterprises. You need to see this, Victoria told Margaret over the phone at 5 a.m. Kovac is not just a corrupt businessman, he is the link between several money-laundering operations on 3 continents. Don't touch anything else, Margaret instructed, her voice thick with concern. I'll contact the FBI team and— Too late, Victoria interrupted, her eyes fixed on the computer screen. I just found emails between Preston and my dad, dating back to 2006. They were planning something called Operation Heartland, long before I came into the picture. The sun was beginning to rise over Manhattan when Charlotte arrived at the apartment, carrying coffee and a determined expression that reminded her so much of her father that Victoria felt her chest tighten. The farm records have revealed something interesting, Charlotte announced, spreading documents out on the glass table. In 2006, Dad received a series of loans from a bank in the Cayman Islands, the same bank Preston used for his offshore operations. Victoria massaged her temples, feeling the fatigue of a sleepless night. So Preston was telling the truth. Dad came to him first. Not exactly, Charlotte corrected, pulling out a specific document. I found this in the old farm files, a threatening letter signed by one of Kovac's associates. Dad was being blackmailed. Victoria's phone vibrated. It was a message from Rachel Martinez. Kovac was seen boarding a flight to New York this morning. We need to act fast. Call Margaret and the security team, Victoria instructed Charlotte as she prepared for another day at Hamilton Enterprises. And contact Richard Montgomery. The council needs to be prepared for what's coming. At the office, Victoria found Mackenzie already waiting, her pale face contrasting with the red of her Armani blazer. "I just received an anonymous call," the young woman reported, her voice shaking. "Someone who works for Kovac. They know I'm cooperating with the FBI." Victoria closed the office door, activating the security system she had recently ordered installed. "Tell me exactly what they said." As Mackenzie reported the veiled threat, Victoria noticed suspicious movement in the building across the street. A man with a professional camera was photographing his office directly. "Get down," Victoria ordered, pulling Mackenzie away from the window seconds before a shot ripped through the armored glass, leaving a perfect circular mark. The security system triggered automatically, and within minutes, the executive floor was surrounded by security guards. Rachel Martinez and her FBI team arrived moments later, transforming the 47th floor of Hamilton Enterprises into a makeshift operations center. "Kovac is sending a message," Martinez concluded, examining the bullet mark. "He knows we have enough evidence to bring down his entire operation." Victoria watched the city below, thinking about how her life had turned into a corporate thriller. "I need to talk to Preston again," she decided. "He knows Kovac's modus operandi better than anyone." "It's not safe," Margaret protested, arriving at the office with a team of lawyers. "Preston may be cooperating with the FBI, but he's still a threat." "He's our best chance of understanding what really happened to my father," Victoria argued, "and now that Kovac is showing his claws, we need all the information we can get." The meeting with the council was tense, with each member aware of the imminent danger the situation represented. Barbara Chen, always pragmatic, suggested temporarily suspending all of the company's international operations. Gerald Wilson proposed an emergency audit of all subsidiaries. "Gentlemen," Victoria interrupted the discussions, her firm voice echoing in the room. "What we are facing goes beyond corporate problems. Kovac is not just a threat to our business, he is a threat to our lives." Richard Montgomery cleared his throat, his face revealing genuine concern. "What do you suggest, Victoria?" "Full transparency with law enforcement, federal protection for key employees, and—" She hesitated, knowing her next suggestion would be controversial. "We need to use the media to our advantage." "Public exposure?" Barbara questioned skeptically. "Kovac operates in the shadows," Victoria explained. "The more light we shed on his operations, the less room he will have to maneuver." When the meeting ended, Victoria found Charlotte waiting in her office with more farm documents. "There's something you need to see," her sister said, holding out an old photo. It was an image of his father with a group of men, including a young Stefan Kovac, taken at the farm in 2005. On the back, a simple note: Project Heartland, Phase 1. "Dad was neither a victim nor an accomplice," Charlotte concluded softly. "He was a piece in a much bigger game." Victoria stored the photo in her briefcase, feeling the weight of revelations that continued to emerge. The phone rang. It was the Federal Detention Center. Preston wanted to talk to her again. "Be careful," Charlotte warned, as Victoria prepared to leave. "Preston may be cooperating, but he's still the man who constructed this entire lie." "I know," Victoria replied, adjusting her Chanel blazer. "But sometimes we need to face our demons to find the truth." Outside, Manhattan continued its frenetic pace, oblivious to the drama unfolding in its skyscrapers. Victoria entered the armored car that was waiting for her, preparing herself for yet another confrontation with the man who had turned her life into an elaborate web of lies and betrayal. But this time, she was ready for whatever revelations came to light. The visiting room of the Federal Detention Center seemed even more oppressive in the twilight. Victoria watched Preston through the bulletproof glass, noticing how the shadows cast by the bars accentuated the worry lines on his face. He appeared to have aged a decade in the few days since his arrest. "Operation Heartland wasn't just about money laundering," Preston began bluntly. "Your father discovered something in 2005 that changed everything, something Kovac would do anything to keep buried." Victoria felt her heart speed up. "What exactly did my father discover?" "William was investigating foreign buyers who were acquiring farms in the Midwest," It seemed innocent at first, normal agricultural investments. But he noticed a pattern. All the properties were located near sensitive military installations. The revelation hit Victoria like a punch in the stomach. Was Kovac using the farms as a cover for espionage? Worse, Preston lowered his voice. The farms were points in a trafficking network. Not just drugs or weapons, information. Confidential US government data being sold to the highest international bidder. Victoria remembered the nights her father would spend hours in his farm office, supposedly reviewing ledgers. Why didn't he report it? Because Kovac had evidence linking William to previous transactions. Your father was not innocent, Victoria. Before discovering the true nature of the operation, he had facilitated some sales, laundered money through the grain silos. A guard approached, indicating that time was running out. Preston leaned forward, his eyes intense. The flash drive has an encrypted file called Kansas 1955, your father's date of birth. Inside is everything you need to know about Operation Heartland. Why are you telling me this now? Because Kovac is in New York and he won't stop until he's sure all traces are covered, including you and Charlotte. Back in her car, Victoria found 3 messages from Rachel Martinez. Kovac had been seen on the Upper East Side, near her apartment. The federal protection team was already in place, but the threat was real and imminent. At the Hamilton Enterprises office, Victoria found Margaret and Charlotte analyzing the newly discovered documents. We need protection for Mom, Victoria declared, dropping her bag. If Kovac is after everyone involved with Operation Heartland. I've already arranged it, Charlotte interrupted. Federal agents are with her in Kansas City. She thinks they are just security guards hired by the company. Victoria poured herself a cup of coffee, trying to organize her thoughts. The encrypted file on the flash drive could be the key to understanding the full extent of Kovac's operation, but it could also be the death knell for his father's reputation. What do we do now? Margaret asked, her expression revealing genuine concern. Kovac wants war, Victoria replied, her voice firm. Then let's give him a war. The next few hours were dedicated to a meticulous plan. Victoria coordinated with the FBI an operation to expose Kovac's entire network. Hamilton Enterprises would be used as bait, seemingly vulnerable, but in fact, a carefully laid trap. Richard Montgomery and the council were informed only of what was necessary. The fewer people who knew the details, the lower the risk of a leak. Mackenzie, still under federal protection, provided crucial information about Kovac's contacts in New York. Near midnight, as Victoria reviewed the final details of the plan in her office, the light flickered briefly. Seconds later, his phone rang. It was a blocked number. It's amazing how much you look like your father, the voice with a strong Eastern European accent said. William also had this determined look in his eyes when he tried to confront me. What do you want, Kovac? Just a simple exchange, the flash drive and all documents related to Operation Heartland for the safety of your family. You have 1 hour to decide. The line went dead. Victoria looked out at the city through her office window, the lights of Manhattan shining like stars against the night sky. Somewhere out there, Kovac was watching, waiting for his next move. His phone vibrated again, a message from Charlotte. I just deciphered more documents from the farm. Dad wasn't just a victim or an accomplice, he was an FBI informant. Victoria felt the world spin for a moment. All the pieces began to fall into place. The nights at the office, the mysterious trips, the money that appeared and disappeared from the farm's records. William Armstrong had played a deadly game for years, trying to expose Kovac's operation from the inside. Gather everyone, Victoria instructed her team via secure messaging. It's time to end this. The clock showed 11:30 p.m. when Victoria finally allowed herself a moment of reflection. Her father's photo still sat on her desk. William Armstrong smiling in front of the farm, his eyes carrying a weight that she was only now beginning to understand. Tomorrow, the whole truth would come out, for better or worse. But tonight, Victoria had a crucial decision to make: honor her father's legacy or protect what was left of her family. Victoria arrived at Hamilton Enterprises before dawn. her mind still processing the revelation about her father being an FBI informant. The Kansas 1955 file had revealed a story far more complex than she imagined. William Armstrong was not just a victim of circumstance, but a man who risked everything to expose an international criminal operation. Agents have confirmed Kovach's position, Rachel Martinez reported as soon as Victoria entered her office. He's staying at the plaza, using a fake name. What about my mother's safety? The team in Kansas City reports that everything is calm. They do not suspect anything. Victoria nodded, going to the window that now boasted new armored glass. The city was beginning to awaken, the rising sun painting the skyscrapers with golden hues that seemed ironically serene considering the tension of the moment. Charlotte entered the office carrying more farm documents. I found something interesting in the old records. In 2005, Dad started making regular deposits into a special account. The amounts exactly coincided with the dates of Kovach's operations. He was documenting everything, Victoria concluded, building a solid case against the entire network. Margaret arrived shortly thereafter, accompanied by 2 federal agents. The judge just signed the warrants. We can act as soon as you give the signal. Victoria looked over the plan once more. Hamilton Enterprises would be the scene of an elaborate trap, an emergency board meeting to discuss alleged irregularities in international operations. The kind of situation Kovach couldn't ignore. Is Mackenzie in position? Victoria asked. Yes, Rachel confirmed. She is leaking controlled information through the channels Kovach usually monitors. Victoria's phone vibrated. It was a message from Preston. Kovach never acts alone. Watch out for Barbara Chen. Victoria frowned, remembering the councillor's recent objections to the internal investigations. Barbara had always seemed like a consummate professional, but now every detail needed to be re-evaluated. Rachel, I need you to check something, Victoria said, passing on the information about Barbara. The FBI agent nodded, immediately starting to make calls. At 9 o'clock the council began to meet. Victoria watched each member through the newly installed security cameras, analyzing expressions and interactions. Barbara Chen arrived on time, her behavior seemingly normal, but Victoria noticed how she checked her phone more often than usual. Ladies and gentlemen, Victoria began the meeting, her firm voice echoing in the room. I summoned everyone because we discovered troubling evidence about our operations in Eastern Europe. While presenting a series of carefully selected documents, Victoria monitored reactions. Barbara shifted uncomfortably when certain names were mentioned, her hands shaking slightly as she took notes. Rachel Martinez sent a discreet message. We found connections. Barbara Chen received substantial transfers from a shell company linked to Kovach. Victoria continued her presentation, maintaining her composure as federal agents discreetly positioned themselves around the building. The plan was in motion. Now it was only a matter of time before Kovach made his move. The first indication that something was wrong came when the lights flickered briefly. Seconds later, the security system detected an intrusion in the lobby. Remain calm, Victoria instructed, as alarms began to sound. The building is secure. Barbara Chen stood up abruptly. This is ridiculous. We cannot continue this meeting under these circumstances. Why not, Barbara? Victoria asked softly. Are you waiting for someone? The councillor's face paled visibly. Before he could respond, the doors to the council room opened. Stefan Kovach entered, followed by 2 men who tried to look businesslike, but whose alert looks gave them away as security guards. Miss Armstrong, Kovach smiled, his accent more pronounced in person. What an interesting meeting you're having. Mr. Kovach, Victoria replied calmly. I was wondering when you would show up. Always so like William, Kovach commented, his cold eyes studying every detail of Victoria's face. He also had this air of moral superiority before he understood how the world really works. You mean before he started collecting evidence against his operation? Kovach's expression hardened. So you know. I know my father was smarter than you gave him credit for. Every transaction you made through him was documented, every meeting was recorded. He built such a solid case that even after his death, the evidence continues to emerge. Barbara Chen moved toward the door, but was stopped by federal agents who emerged from their positions. Simultaneously, more agents entered the room, guns pointed at Kovac and his men. "It's over, Mr. Kovac," Rachel Martinez announced, flashing her badge. "We have warrants for your arrest and the seizure of all your assets in the United States." Victoria watched the scene unfold with a mixture of relief and sadness. Years of lies and manipulation were coming to an end, but the cost had been high. Her marriage, her illusions about her father, her trust in people. As Kovac was handcuffed, he took one last look at Victoria. "You have no idea what you just started. There are bigger things at stake here." "Maybe," Victoria replied, "but unlike you, I'm not afraid of the truth." The morning sun illuminated the federal prosecutor's office as Victoria testified about the events of recent months. The revelations about Operation Heartland had triggered a series of investigations that extended far beyond New York. Kovac's arrest was just the beginning of a process that promised to expose decades of corruption and corporate espionage. "Miss Armstrong," the federal prosecutor adjusted his glasses, "can you tell us more about the moment you discovered your father's true role in this operation?" Victoria took a deep breath, remembering the night she decoded the Kansas 1955 file. "My father wasn't just a Midwestern farmer who fell in with the wrong people. He was a man who, upon discovering something terrible, chose to do the right thing, even if it meant risking everything." Margaret, sitting next to her, took meticulous notes as Victoria detailed how William Armstrong had systematically documented every suspicious transaction, every meeting with Kovac, silently building a case that would survive even his death. "What about Preston Hamilton?" the prosecutor continued. "What exactly was your role in Operation Heartland?" "Preston was an opportunist who saw a chance to build an empire," Victoria replied, keeping her voice steady, despite the pain she still felt when talking about her ex-husband. "He used Kovac's connections to expand Hamilton Enterprises, but he also kept evidence against everyone as a guarantee of his own survival." The deposition continued for hours, every detail being painstakingly recorded. When it was finally finished, Victoria found Charlotte waiting in the hallway, holding a folder that made her heart sink. They were the last documents found in her father's office on the farm. "There's one more thing you need to see," Charlotte said softly, guiding Victoria to a nearby cafe. "I found this hidden in a false bottom of his desk." It was a letter, dated a week before William's death. Addressed to Victoria, it had remained sealed for 3 years, awaiting the moment when the truth would come to light. "Dear Victoria," the letter began in her father's familiar handwriting. "If you're reading this, it means you've finally discovered the truth about Operation Heartland. I want you to know that every decision I made was with our family's safety in mind. When I found out what Kovac was really doing with the farms, I knew I couldn't just stay silent." Victoria felt tears forming as she continued reading. His father explained how he had discreetly approached the FBI, how he had meticulously documented every suspicious transaction, how he had protected his family by keeping them completely ignorant of his movements. "The hardest thing was watching you marry Preston," the letter continued. "I knew who he was, but I also knew that revealing the truth at that moment would put everyone in danger. So I did the only thing I could. I kept building the case, hoping that one day you would be strong enough to deal with the truth." Charlotte held her sister's hand while Victoria finished reading. "Dad knew you would eventually figure it all out. He trusted your intelligence, your strength." "And now?" Victoria asked, more to herself than to Charlotte. "How do we rebuild everything after this?" The answer came in the form of a call from Richard Montgomery. The board had voted unanimously to retain Victoria as permanent CEO of Hamilton Enterprises. "We need someone who not only understands the business," Richard explained, "but who has the integrity to rebuild the company's reputation." Back at her office at Hamilton Enterprises, Victoria found Mackenzie organizing the latest documents for federal investigators. The young woman had transformed in recent weeks, abandoning her ambitious assistant stance for a quiet determination to do the right thing. "Preston is asking to see you again," Mackenzie informed hesitantly. "He says there's more you need to know about your father." Victoria considered the request as she watched Manhattan from her office window. The city felt different now, as if the shadows that had darkened his life for the past few months were finally beginning to lift. "Some truths," she responded finally, "are best left where they are. My father made his choices, Preston made his. Now it's our turn to choose what kind of legacy we want to leave." The phone rang. It was Rachel Martinez with updates on the investigation. Kovacs' network was crumbling, with collaborators emerging in various parts of the world, eager to make deals with authorities. "Your father would be proud," Rachel commented softly. "He began this work, and you finished it." Victoria kept her father's letter in her desk drawer, along with the wedding photo Preston had sent. They were reminders that the truth, however painful, had the power to liberate. Tomorrow would be another day of rebuilding, difficult decisions and new beginnings. But tonight, Victoria allowed herself to feel the weight of her own legacy, no longer just the daughter of William Armstrong or the betrayed wife of Preston Hamilton, but a woman who had found her own strength amid the ruins of carefully constructed lies. A month after Kovacs' arrest, Victoria was observing Manhattan from the terrace of her Upper East Side apartment. Autumn arrived in the city, painting Central Park with golden tones that contrasted with the grey of the skyscrapers. Hamilton Enterprises had weathered the storm, emerging stronger and more transparent than ever. "The latest investigation documents have been processed," Margaret reported, handing Victoria a blue folder. "The judge just approved Preston's plea deal." Victoria absently leafed through the documents, her mind going back to the last time she saw her ex-husband, 2 weeks ago. Preston had aged in prison, his eyes losing that calculating gleam she had known so well. "You know what's ironic?" Preston had said during that meeting. "I spent 15 years building an empire based on lies when I could have built something real with you." Victoria's phone vibrated. It was a message from Charlotte. "Mom is coming from Kansas City. Are you ready to tell her the whole truth about Dad?" The question had dogged Victoria in recent weeks. How do you explain to a widow that her husband was not just the honest farmer she thought she knew, but an FBI informant who risked everything to dismantle an international criminal operation? "Ms. Armstrong," Amanda, his secretary, interrupted his thoughts. "The board is meeting to present the new compliance plan." Victoria adjusted her Chanel blazer and headed to the meeting room. Hamilton Enterprises was undergoing a complete transformation. Every department, every subsidiary, every process was being reviewed and restructured to ensure that Preston and Kovacs' legacy of corruption would never be repeated again. "Third quarter numbers exceeded expectations," Richard Montgomery announced as Victoria entered the room. "The market is responding positively to our new transparency policy." Barbara Chen was notably absent. Her cooperation with authorities had resulted in house arrest while she awaited trial. In his place, Mackenzie held a seat on the board, his experience with Preston's operations proving invaluable in the company's restructuring. "Victoria," Gerald Wilson called after the meeting, "we found something in the old files that you should see." It was an old photo, yellowed with age. It showed William Armstrong with a group of federal agents in front of the family farm. On the back, a note, "Equipe Heartland, First Success, 2006. "Your father wasn't just an informant," Gerald explained softly. "He was part of a larger FBI operation to dismantle corporate espionage networks in the Midwest. The farm was his cover." Victoria felt her heart sink. Each new discovery about her father revealed layers of complexity she had never imagined during her Kansas farm childhood. The rest of the day was filled with meetings and executive decisions. Hamilton Enterprises was reinventing itself, and Victoria was determined to ensure the transformation was more than just skin deep. At dusk, he found Charlotte and her mother, Grace Armstrong, waiting in their apartment. Grace seemed smaller somehow, more fragile, as if the weight of the secrets she was about to discover were already heavy on her shoulders. "Honey," Grace began, her hands shaking slightly as she held a cup of tea, "Charlotte told me you guys found out some things about your father, things I should know." Victoria exchanged a look with Charlotte before beginning to tell the full story. about how William had discovered Kovac's operation, how he had chosen to do the right thing, even though he knew the risks, how he had protected his family by keeping them ignorant of his secret work. "He never told me," Grace whispered, silent tears streaming down her face. "All those years, he carried that burden alone." "He did it to protect us," Charlotte replied softly. "And in the end, his work helped dismantle one of the largest corporate crime operations in the country." Victoria watched her mother process the information, seeing on his face the same conflict that she herself had faced, how to reconcile the image of the man they knew with the complex truth that had emerged. "Your father always said the truth was like a seed," Grace finally spoke, her voice gaining strength. "It may take time to sprout, but once it does, there is no stopping its growth." Victoria's phone rang. It was Rachel Martinez with an update. Kovac had begun cooperating with authorities, revealing connections that stretched across several countries. The operation that William Armstrong had helped expose was finally being completely dismantled. "I think it's time to visit the farm," Victoria suggested, watching the sun set over Manhattan. "Go back to our roots, better understand where we came from." Grace smiled through her tears. "Your father would be proud of you too. How you faced the truth, how you chose the right path, even when it would have been easier to look the other way." That night, as the three women shared memories and plans for the future, Victoria felt a peace she hadn't experienced in months. Hamilton Enterprises was transforming, her father's secrets had been revealed, and although the road ahead was still challenging, she finally felt like she was building something truly meaningful. "To the truth," Charlotte proposed a toast, raising her glass, "and to the legacy of William Armstrong." "To the family," Grace added. "To the future," Victoria added, watching the lights of Manhattan shine like stars against the night sky. A future that, for the first time in a long time, seemed full of honest possibilities and new beginnings.